Welcome to Faith and Freedom. For the next few minutes, we hope to inform, inspire, and encourage you as we discuss the legal victories and challenges to your fundamental freedoms and religious liberties. Faith and Freedom comes to you from Liberty Counsel, a civil liberties education and legal defense organization. Join us now as Matt Staver, the President and General Counsel of Liberty Counsel, explains the latest legal issues all across this country in the courtrooms of America. Liberty Counsel is winning the battle for your constitutional freedoms.
The fault line for Western civilization runs right through Israel. I am Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. Joining me is Sean Akers, vice president of Middle Eastern Affairs for Liberty Counsel. I say that, Sean, because I believe that the fault line for our liberty and our freedom, the Western civilization, really does run through Israel, because it is there that the Western civilization, our values, were born. America is linked to Israel because of our Judeo-Christian values. It is there where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob walked. It is there where the promise was made to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, that those who bless his descendants, God will bless. Those who curse the descendants of Abraham, God will also curse. It is there where the prophet Daniel and Ezekiel and all the other great prophets and Amos prophesied that the people would return. It's there, of course, that Moses was given the Ten Commandments in that area down in what's now Egypt, but on Mount Sinai, and then brought the Ten Commandments into what is now Israel. And those Ten Commandments changed a nation and changed literally the world. And thus, in America, that's why we have Ten Commandments displayed everywhere, because they have profoundly influenced our understandings of right and wrong, profoundly influenced the development of Western legal thought and tradition and law in Europe, and of course, from Europe to the United States. We are connected at the hip to Israel with regards to our Judeo-Christian values, what we call Western civilization. Those values are under attack in a significant way, both through Islam to attack those values, radical Islamics, and also through other kinds of things that we have here in America. Dr. Judith Reisman talked about the Kinsey Institute, trying to undermine those core values through a radicalization of human sexuality. The whole infrastructure of Western values is clearly under attack in both Israel, obviously, and here in the United States.
You know, Matt, it's pretty easy to draw that connection in just a few easy steps. There's a man named Dr. Thomas Dye that defines public policy as anything that governments do or fail to do when they could have done something. And it's if you think about it, we don't create governments just willy-nilly. We do them out of ideas, and those ideas have sources, usually ideologies, and those ideologies flow from philosophies, and those philosophies flow from worldviews, and those worldviews come from someplace. You know, it was Alexis de Tocqueville that came to the United States to figure out what in the world was going on with this nation that was burgeoning in liberty, that was growing so greatly. And what he said was everywhere he went, he found that people may disagree on religious matters, on sects of Christianity, Judaism, but that everywhere he went, they agreed on what was right and what was wrong. They shared a worldview. They shared a moral code. And all you have to do is take that step back and ask where. And he said that everywhere he went, they would basically believe the same Christian religion. We got that moral code from the land of Israel. We didn't make it up. Our founders didn't just look up and say, you know, these Ten Commandment things were a good idea. We got those from the land of Israel. When you say that fault line runs directly through Israel, I think that's the most accurate statement in the world. All of our blessings have flown literally from the worldview that we got from the Bible that came from Israel.
And you know what the fault line is one side of it is Western civilization. The other side of it is secularization or East, so to speak, and in East in a philosophical sense. And if you look at the threat that Israel faces, and in fact it is clearly revealed in a book that we want to make available to you. It's called Sharia Threat to America, and it's written by experts in Sharia Islam. And sometimes you think of Sharia law, but Sharia is more than a law. It is a lifestyle. It is an entire way of looking at things. It does include law, but it is an entire lifestyle. And within those threats, let's just look at the Middle East and in America. You know, the Muslim Brotherhood started in Cairo, Egypt. They expanded from Cairo to other places throughout the Middle East. And they've come, obviously, to the United States. Virtually every Muslim organization in America is in some way linked to or has come from the Muslim Brotherhood. And there's a lot of documentation that would indicate that. Not everyone, but most of them have. And the Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization. And it has terrorist leaders, as at least some of its leaders have been clearly linked to terrorism, I should say. What you ultimately have within radical Islam, or some people might say mainstream Islam, what you ultimately have, some people, not every Islamic is going to be a terrorist, but some of those are more of the moderate or the liberal Islamics. But if you come into mainstream core values Islamic religions with the radicalism component that you ultimately see coming out of this radical aspect of Islam, you have what you call jihad. One of the things that they do is jihad. We think of jihad as just simply somebody strapping on bombs and blowing up another individual. But that's only a small portion of jihad. The bigger portion of jihad is you ultimately undermine the institutions and the infrastructures. You undermine that in a lot of different ways. You can agree with the adversary when they are in a greater position of strength. So long as it is a temporary agreement, you can sign a treaty, a peace treaty, if your adversary is stronger than you, so long as the ultimate goal is to continue to work to undermine the institutions so that you can become greater than the adversary. And thus, when you do become greater than the adversary, you force them to accept Allah as God and Muhammad as his prophet, or you make them pay the tax, or alternatively, you take their life. What you see in this book, Sharia, and what you ultimately see in America, all the different infrastructures that are taking place and all of the different threats to these core values is what you see happening in Israel as well. It is the attempt to undermine these core values. And you see it happening in the nations around Israel and the radicalism that ultimately results as a result of undermining these core foundational values.
Matt, the saying that all's fair in love and war, you need to keep in mind that Intifada is war. And whether it's an ideological war or a physical war, Western civilization is facing threats both from the outside and from within. Those from outside are the terrorist threats that tend to keep you at bay. But from within, that's we're facing that on so many different fronts. One is Islam, and as you've pointed out, in Islamic ideology, if you're dealing with the infidel, you can say you need to read, if you want to understand that, you really need to read Machiavelli's The Prince and Sun Tzu's Art of War, and you can kind of get a sense of what you're dealing with, because deception, all war is deception according to Sun Tzu.
Yeah, and really war is deceit according to Islam.
It's a shared
same
philosophy.
Thing. That's right. So, it is permissible to engage in deceit if your ultimate end goal is still accomplished. And so you can temporarily lie, you can temporarily enter into negotiations as long as you know that your ultimate end goal is to destroy the enemy. And that's exactly what Islam is to the West. There is an assault on Western values by radical Islam, both in the Middle East and certainly here in America as well. There's also an attempt to expand the sacral sites, and thus you have the New York mosque issue. Those are not just simply because people want to create a mosque in a certain location. Those are real part of the jihad, not the kind that you strap on bombs, but the bigger kind of jihad, the greater percent of jihad, the more frequent stealth jihad, as it's called, or cultural jihad, as it's referred to literally tear down the infrastructure and expand the territory. The ultimate goal within this Islamic assault on Western values is to literally spread Islam and create Sharia throughout all of our institutions.
And if you'd like to see that, Matt, in action, I was in Israel several years ago. It was the first time I had been, and was driving across the countryside with a Jewish friend, and I asked, what are all the green lights on the hillsides? Because the hillsides were just dotted with green lights. They were not a quarter of a mile apart. Green lights everywhere. I thought they were service stations. He said those are mosques. He said because what you have to do is establish your authority by placing a mosque and making the minaret on the mosque the highest thing. It's got to oversee everything else. Everything has to be subservient architecturally to the mosque. And that's what it was. It was a sea of green.
Well, give us a call. I want you to order two books that are very informative. One is Sharia, Threat to America, and then the other is Dr. Judith Reisman's book, Sexual Sabotage. She talks about the assault on our fundamental values coming out of the radicalization of human sexuality. Those two books are very eye-opening, and they will literally open your eyes to new issues that you may not have even thought about. Sharia, Threat to America is one book, and the other is Dr. Judith Reisman's book, Sexual Sabotage. You can order them by going to lc.org, send us an email, or go to the store there at the Liberty Counsel's website, or call us at 1-800-671-1776. You can also support this ministry by contributing right there on the website at lc.org, or sending a text message 20222, and the subject line should say LC for a contribution of $10.
You have been listening to Matt Staver of Liberty Counsel. Our hope is to encourage and inspire you to stand up for your faith, family, and freedoms. We can accomplish a lot when we work together. Get informed and get involved today. Sign up for our free monthly newsletter, The Liberator. We will send it out to you free of charge. Stay informed with our Liberty Alert email update. Just click on the website at www.lc.org or call us at 1-800-671-1776. Tune in next time to learn more about your rights right here on Faith and Freedom.